9.2 introduces absolute values. Now, and for these, it's not just the absolute value of a certain number. This is where you're actually going to solve an equation, and then they're going to move to inequalities. So if you're solving absolute value equations, the biggest thing with absolute value equations is more of the setup and how they want you to think about them. That when you talk about absolute value, it's the distance from zero. You don't have to, just kind of give you a visual here. So when I'm talking about the distance from zero, that's what they mean for absolute value. So if I said, all right, tell me something that's 4 units away from zero, well, what number would it be? It would be 4, right? But what's another number that's 4 units away from zero? What they're talking about. It's a distance away from zero. It's really what it is. It's almost like a blast zone. When you drop a bomb, how far out is it going to go? I mean, that's the best way of thinking about it. So what they're going to do when they go through this thing, and they're going to kind of walk you off with some shorter problems, and then kind of have you think about it from here, is to kind of get you in that idea. They're going to ask you to find the absolute value of y equal to 9. And what that means is, tell me the distance from zero. Tell me the numbers that are from zero that would get you an answer of 9. Well, it could be positive 9 or it could be negative 9, right? So when you're solving equations, here's what you're going to basically do. Is you're going to give me an equation where you're going to take this number you've got, where you've got y equals 9. That distance could be a negative 9 if you go to the left side, or that distance could be a positive 9 if you go to the right-hand side. And answer-wise, I think so that's your two answers. Probably in the online homework, they're going to tell you to separate the two answers with a comma. So I think in the online homework, you'd have an answer that basically that would be like this. So y would equal 9 or negative 9. Now, they shouldn't ask you to graph. If they ask you to graph that would just be 2 dots. You'd have if you had different numbers on a number line that were here, they ask you to graph it. You'd put a dot at negative 9. You'd put a dot at positive 9. That'd be the graph. That's all you would do. If it's just the equation, it's just that 1 point, or in this case, because it's absolute value, it's the 2 points that's there. I don't think they'll ask for those, but just in case they do, that would be graphing-wise in your answer. And you may be thinking, well, that's pretty easy. That's almost too easy, right? Because it's like there's got to be more to it. Well, here's where they kind of walk you into the next part of it. They're going to add in a variable so that you do have to do a little bit more work with it here. Maybe you got something like this where we're doing 3 times the absolute value of x equals 9. And when you're solving with the absolute values equations, here's basically your rules that you want to go through for this one. I want you to think about the steps on it here. You have to get the absolute value symbol by itself. That no matter what you do, the one most important thing you have to do, and really it's only 2 steps when it comes down to it, is you have to get the absolute value by itself, which means sometimes you might have to add some numbers to move it to the other side. You might have to do subtraction, you might do division, you might even do some multiplication. But you've got to get the absolute value symbols. You've got to get this thing by itself. So if you're getting that part by itself, in this case we divide both sides by 3, right? And then after you've got that by itself, well, then the second thing you're going to do is you're going to split it up so that the answer, that's where you're going to split it into 2 parts. That's what we're going to do like we did on the other part, that you'll have, if we had an absolute value of x when we had 4 a minute ago, that's where we'd split this thing up. So you had an absolute value of x equals -4 and x equals 4. And again, we're going to keep getting more complicated as we go along. Now, when you split it into 2 parts, that's where you want to remove the absolute values. That once you split it into 2 parts, well, now you've gotten rid of the absolute value, because now you're looking at it as 2 separate problems. One where you're going to the left side with the negatives, and one where you're going to the right side where it's the positives. So backing up to the problem we had back here, we'll divide both sides by 3. So the 3's would cancel. Now you've got the absolute value of x by itself. And now that you've got the absolute value of x by itself, there's where you would split it apart into 2 pieces. So x would equal -3 and x would equal +3. Now, and even in that one, we'll look at somewhere where, again, we'll look at a couple more examples that are still fairly short, but where you have to do an extra step or 2. Okay, let's go with the absolute value of x minus 9 equals 10. Okay, to get the absolute value by itself, you've got to get rid of the -9, so to get rid of it, we're going to add 9 to both sides. And once you've got the absolute value all by itself, again, just split it in 2 parts. Now, the good thing is, when it's just absolute value of x as a number, when you split it into 2 parts, you're going to have just the -19 and then the +19. So that would be the 2 numbers you're looking for. And somebody's thinking, will it always be that way? Well, no, not necessarily. Because if they put more than just x on the inside of the absolute value, that's when you'll get a little bit different answer than just those 2 numbers with a plus and minus. Let's do something like this, where you've got absolute value of x plus 2 plus 3 equals 7. Now, and you can almost highlight just the part that's in the absolute value, because that's the part we're trying to get by itself. So for right now, we just have to get that thing by itself. Once you highlight what's inside the absolute value, it's the other stuff that's left over you've got to get rid of. So for this one, the only thing you have to get rid of is that -3. Or the +3, and to get rid of it, you would subtract 3 on both sides. So now we've got the absolute value symbol by itself, and then 7 minus 3 is 4. And here's where you would split it into 2 parts. And this will be the one time where it's not just going to be, where it's going to, the answer is not going to be just 4 and -4, because you've got this extra little something that's on the inside, the absolute value. That's where you actually have to do a little bit of extra work there. So x plus 2 could equal -4, but at the same time, we're also going to let that x plus 2 would equal +4. So we'll subtract 2. So x would equal -6 for one of the answers. And for this one, we'll do the same thing. We'll still subtract 2, but this time it's 4 minus 2. So then x would equal 2. So it just depends on where they put the numbers. If if there's just an x on the inside, once you separate it, it's just going to be the positive and negative of that one number. If you've got some other things on the inside with that, absolute value, then it's going to change things up. So it's not just going to be the plus and minus. You're going to have to move it around just a little bit to kind of get you there. Okay, now, like with everything else we've done so far, you're going to run across some trick questions. And here's what you have to look out for with the equations with the trick questions. Start over here. Let's do the absolute value of x plus 4 equals 4. So keep it kind of short. Okay, so we've got just the absolute value. So for this one, we've got to get rid of the plus 4. So we need to go minus 4 on both sides. Okay, so it's the absolute value of x equals 0. If you split that off, is there such a thing as a negative 0? All right. I mean, there's really not a positive 0 either. So for this one, if you get it to the absolute value and it just equals 0, there's only one answer because there is no plus or minus 0. 0 is just 0. It's not anything. So if you get the absolute value equal to 0, there's just the one answer. There's not the two answers. Because how far away is 0 from itself? It's not, right? You're staying on top of it. So, you know, that's a very small bomb. It's just you got to pinpoint the target to make it work. Okay, and then the other trick question, and we'll just kind of leave it like we'll even kind of skip through all the steps here. Let's say you had absolute value of x equals negative 10. Do you measure distances negative? So if you're going out digging a hole, you say you're going to dig a hole negative 10 feet into the ground. You don't, do you? It's just 10 feet in the ground. So with absolute value, if there's not a negative distance with this one, because here's kind of what they say is, all right, if you do the absolute value of negative 10, how far is negative 10 away from 0? It's 10 units, right? So if you do absolute value of 10, that's just 10. If you do the absolute value of 10, that's also just 10. So basically is this: you cannot take absolute value of anything and get it to be a negative number outside the parentheses or outside the absolute value. So if you ever get one like this where you've got absolute value of x equal to a negative number when you get finished with it, that's always going to be no solution. Because when you take the distance, because that's what absolute value is, the distance, we always measure distance in positive terms. We don't measure negative terms. Because there's nothing in here you can plug into this equation that'll make it out to be a negative 10. Because when you do the absolute value distance, it always makes that number positive. Doesn't matter what you plug in there. So any negative number. Now, sometimes they'll set it up where that it looks like it's going to be a negative when it's no solution answer. You know, you may start off with something like this, where you've got absolute value of x minus 6 equals negative 4. Looks like it's no solution, but again, the first thing you have to do is you've got to get the absolute value by itself. So you'd have to add 6 to both sides. And once you do that, to even it out, now you've got absolute value of x equals 2. Now you're okay, because it's a positive number. So now you can split this thing up and tell me, all right, if that's the answer I've got, then x is going to equal negative 2, or x would equal positive 2. So that's the one part you got to be a little bit tricky of. If it's just absolute value of x by itself and it's a negative number, it's always no solution, because distance is always a positive when you're talking about absolute value. If it looks like it might be, just get the x by itself, and once the x is by itself, you know, then you're okay. They could kind of start off the opposite, where you could start with a problem that starts off looking okay. Let's just add pages in here. You could start off with a problem that looks like it's fine. And you could have absolute value of x plus 4 equals 3. That you look at it and you go, oh, okay, this is fine. But when you subtract the 4 to get rid of it and move it over here, well, now you've got an absolute value of x equals negative 1. Once you get there and the absolute value by itself, If that's negative, that's where you just stop and say, okay, that's no solution. So when you're going through these, just don't just do the quick glance at it. You still have to do that first step. You've got to get the absolute value of x by itself. And then from there, look and see what you have. If it's a negative number, you're done. If it's positive, then you split it off into two cases and then see what answers you're going to get off of it. Okay, so that's 9.3. What we're going to do is 9.4 is almost the same thing. So we'll kind of walk into that one, but we'll do that on the next video.